Okay, hi everyone. I'm Jeannie Ralston. I know some of you, and some of you are new to our virtual events. And I'm so glad to see you. We do Sunday salons, we do Thursday night author events. Um, Laura Zam could have been in either one. Sunday salon, we do kind of personal development and things like that. But you also are an excellent writer. Laura has written for us for Next Try before, and she's also in her piece. I just republished it. It was on tantric sex, getting tantric sex lessons. So we're going to ask about that. But there's so much more because you've written a book called The Pleasure Plan. Can you hold one up?
Got it right here.
The Pleasure.
And it's also behind me. I've got a million copies.
And maybe we want to, I think we should give one to somebody here today. So we'll decide afterwards. We'll talk about that and get that arranged. But
beautiful.
Laura, I think we talked about, did you want to start off by reading a little something so we can get an idea?
Perfect. I'm going to read from the very, very beginning of the book, which gives you an idea of what the book is about. So, maybe you're just not a very sexual person, says Dr. Fay in a slow Southern drawl. I have come to this office to save my new marriage. After 30 years of searching, I found a man I love who loves me back. At 48, I never had reciprocity before, meaning a real relationship, but now I do, with Kurt, my miracle husband. Kurt doesn't know the extent of my damage. What if I'm just broken, I ask, my voice a shaky vibrato. I've never talked openly about the problems plaguing me since I was 17, low libido, orgasm challenges, and pelvic pain. I always assumed my obstacles were permanent, but is that true? If my sexuality is broken, I venture, sitting taller on the maroon leather couch I'm sticking to, I can fix it, can I? Not if you're not a sexual person, says Dr. Fay, an attractive marriage and family therapist specializing in hypnosis. Look, it's fine to have no libido, you know that, right? I nod, thinking of grandmas and nuns and those that make asexual lifestyle. But Fay's outfit, strange for a mental health professional, especially one who's middle-aged, puts notions in my head. A question pulls like thread from her gold metallic miniskirt. It sheds from her short sleeve mohair sweater. She looks like an unwashed lover might come by right after I leave here. So I ask, can Eros be taught? The hypnotist chuckles, tucking brown hair behind her ears, widening her pale green eyes. Would you like to hear about others in your situation, she inquires. Now, one client, she'd rather be waterboarded than sleep with her husband. I know I should interrupt, revealing what I haven't shared yet, the experiment. 2 weeks ago, I initiated a strategy to finally heal after 30 years. It started with no longer believing that pleasure is out of reach. I need to get this visit back on track. I understand what you're telling me, I say, but do you think we could talk about my trauma? I watch her hands find their way to her hips. Her pose makes me think she's forgotten what I've disclosed in our previous telephone intake. That happened a long time ago, she says finally with a wave of pink manicure. What if she's right about my past? These events did happen a long time ago. As for my therapists of yore, childhood was all they dwelled upon, never what I should do with grown-up maladies I was left with. Even my gynecologist was stumped. Since I started my experiment, I've learned official names in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM. Hypoactive sexual desire disorder, female sexual arousal disorder, female orgasmic disorder, sexual aversion disorder, dyspareunia, vaginismus. I have every hoo-ha hang up in the DSM. then I try to get this therapist to hypnotize me, and she keeps telling me that she's not going to hypnotize me, that I should just sleep with my husband so that he won't leave me. I'll skip to the end. Taking a last glance around this office, so I feel like my project basically has been killed at this point. Taking a last glance around the office and at the hypnotist, I say to myself, she has got to be the worst therapist on the entire planet. Consequently, I open the door to the hallway. It looks like a long tan tunnel taking me back to my delicate life. I swing around. I want to try hypnosis, I announce. I know you don't think it'll help, but I want to do it anyway. I have to start somewhere. If I leave here without some implementation of my plan, which I call the pleasure plan, I don't trust myself to seek out another therapist or to advance. Perhaps my experiment has already stirred up desire. And what I desire now is autosuggestion on a red leather couch with a therapist who may or may not be incompetent. I want her to change her mind about me. I'd like to schedule another appointment, I say, taking out my planner. Reluctantly, she agrees. Driving home to my husband, I try to imagine what lies beyond this day. I can't see it, not yet. What it will take to ultimately fully heal. 15 kinds of practitioners, 30 pleasure-enhancing techniques. I never could have predicted the struggles Kurt and I would encounter or the aliveness that would permeate our lives. I have no idea what's in store for me. All I know is that whatever happens, this visit has already altered my future. It has strengthened my body, my being, for hope.
Yay! Oh my gosh. I have to admit that when I first heard about your book, I thought it was just that you just continue with those tantric sex lessons, but you tried everything. You've gone everywhere.
Everywhere,
So
yeah.
I mean, we're not going to give away anything in the book, but can you just talk about some of the things you've tried?
Absolutely. So I tried 15 different kinds of practitioners, I said, and 30 different healing modalities. I'm actually going to consult my book because I list them for the reader. And I actually talk about all of them and how they might work for another person, because not everybody's going to want to have private tantra lessons, etc. So, okay. So I tried hypnosis. I did see that hypnotist 2 other times, and she did hypnotize me. And she was also did all other kinds of cognitive behavioral therapy with me. I tried a sex brunch where I gathered friends together. It's kind of like this, Jeannie.
Oh, wow.
I gathered friends together, and just with the goal of each of us talking about sex and trying to talk about things that are difficult to talk about, to challenge our shame. Because when I started this project, I can't tell you how ashamed I was to talk about all of these sex problems. I couldn't even really admit to myself all the things that were wrong. Anyways, I did a couples retreat with my husband. We also have these tantric sex lessons very late in the book, and that's what I wrote that piece about a couple of years ago. And thank you so much for redoing that. I did a private tantra session where the tantrika, she taught me my own anatomy, and like she taught me my G-spot. But in order to do so, she just had to reach right in. So it was literally hands-on, but not with a goal of arousal. It was with a goal of education, but in this very detailed way. Oh, I did emotional freedom technique, which is tapping and trauma therapy and physical therapy, pelvic floor physical therapy. I used dilators. I did orgasmic meditation. I took a workshop with Betty Dodson where we learn a masturbation technique. We're naked for 2 days. Betty Dodson is a second wave feminist who's now 91.
Whoa.
And when I did the workshop with her, she was 86, and she teaches female pleasure. This workshop she's been doing since the 1970s. She is on a mission. She's been on a mission all these years to teach women about their bodies and how to claim and reclaim pleasure. So, and many more. So
Yes.
I did a lot.
Well, I'm fascinated because I know that you were struggling to be able to respond at all, but I imagine these techniques and these people you've seen can help you, even if you have you're just midway, you're still interested in sex but not achieving orgasm or achieving what you want. So it sounds like there's a lot to learn for people who are on all ends of the libido spectrum, I guess, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And what I found was, for myself, if I could, or when I did put all of these together and say, well, what actually was successful for me? What really did work? What I found was that success was the result of two categories of treatment. One category was medical, was getting proper medical diagnosis. I had a lot of medical problems that had been undiagnosed for decades and decades.
You mean so with physically in your anatomy?
Yeah, I had pelvic pain, so I had painful sex, and I had different kinds of pain with sex, with intercourse, and I didn't have any information about that when I went in. But then I learned about it and learned about these different things that were going on, and we can talk about that because one of these problems, it used to be called vaginismus, and it largely is still referred that way, but it's also called hypertonic pelvic floor syndrome. And it's overly tight and weak pelvic floor muscles. And for people like me, the first time I tried to have sex, it took 8 months to have penetration. So there are people who have this condition, and it can prevent sex, and it can also make sex, if penetration is possible, it makes sex uncomfortable because there's just excessive tightness. But in middle age, when a lot of us start to have pain with sex because of vaginal atrophy, sometimes we can develop vaginismus in conjunction with that, because it's basically just the pelvic floor muscles go, nope, don't like that, or don't like that anymore. Anyway, so getting this medical information was very, very critical, including menopause. That's late in the book. I find out how menopause is related to this. And the other category was just to get really good pleasure information, to get my own sex ed, detailed sex ed about my body, and just general sex ed about women's sexual response. I felt very lacking in that department. And once I started to really get into it, I found that it not only healed me, it put me on a mission to become a sexuality educator and to help other women get information about their circumstances and their bodies as well.
So it seems like that you thought it was mostly psychological, like with your exchange with that therapist. But is it really not psychological? I mean, from these two things?
Yeah, you know what? That is such a great question. I always thought it was psychological because I'd been in therapy for decades, and I had dealt with it's sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. That's the trauma that I allude to. And I talk about it in more depth in the book than it's in that first chapter. So I thought it was psychological. I couldn't pinpoint it exactly. But essentially I just felt broken. And the way I put it together in my head was, okay, I was abused, and therefore I'm going to have sex problems for the rest of my life. I'm never going to really enjoy it. I'm always going to have pain. And it was only when I started to realize what was going on in a medical way, in a physical way, that I could remedy those particular issues, and also realize that when something is going on like pain, it is not psychosomatic. And often women go to the gynecologist and the gynecologist doesn't find anything, it's a little bit of a remnant of hysteria. It's like, well, you must be imagining this, that you are in pain. This is happening. I just realized it's happening a lot for women post-pregnancy, that women are after pregnancy is a kind of trauma to the genitals.
Well, that's
and even with even with a C-section, there's so many things that are now happening. Breastfeeding has we're producing all this prolactin, which suppresses estrogen and also testosterone, so there can be dryness and kind of the symptoms that we often have now in later years. But that can happen while we're breastfeeding, some of that, and pain can set in addition to, all the stuff that's happened to the genitals. And so, but many times after pregnancy, women, the doctor doesn't see anything wrong. And after that particular period of time of healing, the doctors say, well, you're good to go. I don't see anything. But there may be this kind of vaginismus where the muscles themselves are going, no, I'm just not there right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is not, and so sometimes this is something that's going on. But again, I'm like I said, I'm on this mission to educate women, but also to educate health providers to look beyond this idea that, okay, well, if I can't find the pain, if I can't find something, then this woman must be, I don't know, making it up or something.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to encourage all of you, if you have questions, you can write them in the chat, and I can either unmute you, or if you, because of the subject matter, if you'd rather not talk directly, I understand. And again, I want to tell you that we're not live streaming this, so if that helps, I just wanted to make sure people knew that they had some privacy if they wanted to ask questions. I didn't want them to be shy. But what I'm thinking is how much shame women have to deal with if they did have pain or something, that whole feeling of something's wrong with me. And you, oh my God, you hear, you watch Sex and the City and people are having orgasms all over the place and you're like, oh shit. And it just must be so wearing on you.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I started the book just in that place, because I think I found I'm not alone in feeling like, okay, there's just something wrong with me. Other people must be knocking over the furniture. And obviously I'm just broken in some way, or just I'm not sexual, or I'm not sexual anymore. And that's the end. So I would encourage everyone to find somebody, a sex therapist, a doctor, a combination of people, to really, if there are issues that you feel that you want to address and heal or investigate, that you get somebody who's knowledgeable about sexuality. And we can talk about that further, where to find those people, but to find someone who really knows about sex, because not every doctor and every therapist has that detailed information. They may be specialists in other things, but not that. And so we could get advice that in many ways compounds this feeling of like, well, we're just making it up, or it's just not important, right? Doctors can also kind of confirm that. I've had it said to me, when I started going through menopause, well, does your husband get erections? Because if your husband doesn't get erections anymore, then you don't need to have sex.
And you're like, is this like a solution? Well, speaking of husbands, so, and your husband he was very supportive, and we can talk more about that, but I imagine that there's a sticky point. I know that I have friends, and menopausal friends, who do have pain or aren't as interested, or for whatever reason. And it's really difficult figuring it all out with your man in
Yes.
that situation. So do you have any thoughts on that? How to help that along?
Yeah, absolutely. So first is getting finding a provider that can help, and working out the best solution for vaginal pain associated with menopause. there are hormonal options, but there are non-hormonal options that can also be really, really good. I use two. I use estrogen, and then I also use hyaluronic acid, a cream, hyaluronic acid cream. It sounds horrible, acid, but it's not. It's nice. It's a nice, but it's not like that. It's quite good, and it's almost as good for my body. It's almost as good as the estrogen. So it's getting those options. There was a study that was done that found that only 7% of women who had atrophy were actually they were actually deciding to have any kind of remedy. They were deciding, only 7% went for the remedy. And largely it was because they just weren't bringing it up with their doctors. So that's really important to first get that, figure that out from a medical perspective. The other aspect is the communication piece, which is critical and tricky, definitely tricky. So in the sex ed field, we talk a lot about something called outer course. Outer course is everything that you do sexually that's not intercourse, that's not penetration, I should say. And this can be really a lifesaver for a sexual relationship, because it's de-emphasizing penetration, especially when that is problematic. Now, sometimes it's a woman or a vulva owner can get their pain under control with different kinds of remedies. And so sex is absolutely fine, there's no problem. Other times there still may be lingering issues, and that's where the outer course can be particularly helpful, because then you can balance this. I really like the idea of outer course, because I think it helps women of all ages actually redefine sex so it's not so phallic centric. It's not this idea of foreplay, which is conceptually a warm-up act for male ejaculation. And then, right, and then the main event, which may or may not really be the main event for a woman. Only 30% of women have orgasms through penetration alone, meaning that that's really what really is floating their boat is the penetration. So we need to really look at a woman's body, and I think that it's healthy to redefine sex, but that is a negotiation with a partner, and part of that is just an education, really, through articles and different kinds of media. And I can send some to you, Jeannie, if you want to post it afterward, so that partners can get educated about the fact that the couple may need to open up their it's another kind of open marriage, I suppose. Just open up the concept of sex so that it's not just the same old way, which may not be working for a woman's body.
Well, that's good to know, and I think that getting the husband on board is just essential, and or male partner or female partner. I mean, I imagine could be all of those. But what? So speaking of your husband, so did it make this whole thing? I imagine would make you closer going through it together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was amazing. Because I had been lying, and I'm not the only female who does this. We talk about faking orgasms, but I think women often fake the whole thing in terms of real, authentic joy in that experience, and really having agency in our sexual encounters. So I was just faking it. I mean, there were moments of that were good or occasionally great, but for the most part I was just going along with this. So once I started to really experiment, seeing all these people, but I was experimenting with my husband, taking what I was learning and saying, okay, let's try this together. And that just created a whole other level of bond between us, and it completely radicalized our sex life, because it turned our sex life into constant experimentation and adventure. And he got really on board. After a while, there's a lot of resistance early in the book. He doesn't, he's not really down with the way that I'm going about this healing. And he goes along with it very tentatively. And anyway, there are some issues, but he eventually really, really gets excited about it because it transforms our sex life. And also because he realized that I was not the only one who wanted sexual healing. He also wanted sexual healing because men or our partners, whatever their gender, they also have some kinds of wounds, whether it's rejection, right? Whether it's, feelings about their own performance, their own virility, right? Right. Our partners also have lots and lots of areas that could use healing. So shame, right? Shame is big for people of all genders. So he was very excited that that could be something that we could mutually explore together.
I love that. I can see how that would really help you once you got him. As you said, it must take a while to get that. Patrice, you had a comment. Do you want to ask it yourself? If so, you want to unmute yourself? Oh, Patrice.
Oh, hi there. Good morning. This is a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm always amazed about how many women I speak to who are in their 50s or 60s and know so little about their own bodies.
Yeah.
And are taught that it's an ugly, dirty thing, and sex is an ugly, dirty thing. And no, I applaud you. I don't really have a question. It's just making me think. I'm a massage therapist and I'm not a sex professional. I've read a lot about it, and I get women on my table who I've never met who ask me questions. And
oh, really?
yeah, and so.
Well, you did have a comment about the three-dimensionality of the clitoris.
Oh, that one, yeah.
And I brought a little 3D. I brought a 3D clitoris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many women think it's just the hood.
Yes. Well, they think it's just. Actually, they don't even know it's the hood. They think it's just this little part here, which we call the glans, just the tiny little part, which is analogous to the tip of the penis.
Right.
But the hood is actually there's a hood is like foreskin. Then there's the shaft, just like a penile shaft. This is all erectile tissue. This all gets a hard-on basically. And then there are legs. These go down. These are inside the inner labia and inside the largely inside. And then these are called bulbs or vestibular bulbs, and they hug the entrance to the vagina. And so when everything is erect, and this is an erect clitoris, when everything is erect, it creates a network, which some people call a erectile network. It creates basically a full hard-on rather than what some people call a chubby, like a partial erection. But yes, this was only mapped in the 90s.
Wow.
Only in the 90s. Because of lack of funding and I think fundamental fear and disregard for women's sexuality, we didn't even know, right, where erectile tissue was and how it looked when a woman was aroused. Anyway, so they found this out, but still now it's 20 years later and we still don't widely know about this. So that's problematic. Part of my mission. Thank you so much, Patrice.
And Bella's microphone isn't working, but she says that she never gave me the sex talk. She felt that was the responsibility of the school to do. The only thing she talked to me about was my menstrual cycle, but sex was not something we discussed at home. She also made me wear baggy clothes to hide my figure. Ow, sorry, Bella, that's hard.
Yeah, but and this also connects to, Patrice had an earlier comment about mothers, what our mothers teach us. And, our mothers they are limited by their own upbringing around these issues, and also their own sex education, which of course is going to be lacking even more than ours was. And so it becomes just generational. I know that well, for generation women, we're essentially told to just lie there, right? To allow our husbands to have pleasure with our bodies. That was our wifely duty. And similar to what the hypnotist tells me in that session, she says, I didn't read that part specifically, but she says, just have sex. Just have sex because your husband's going to leave you unless you do. Anyway, I feel like after second wave feminism, which people of our generation grew up with as young women, we have a notion that we are fully liberated from this idea of, okay, I'm just going to lie there. But I think it's very insidious, and I think it really is still very, very baked in, at least to the extent that we believe that a male partner's pleasure is extremely important, and that our pleasure is secondary and or sometimes not important at all.
Wow. Yes, I think that's true. And I think that it's still, the penis, God. So it's hard to get away from that. Sorry. But yeah, so I'm curious about in the younger women now. Has there been some changes, or what do you think? Have you studied that, or
Yeah, I think that a couple of things. I think that there is a lot more sex ed out these days. The women's magazines are putting a lot of information here. We just had a question about vaginismus, and
yes,
I'll talk a little bit more about that. When I started my project back in 2011, this healing project, I had never heard of vaginismus, even though I had it for 30 years. I stumbled upon it online. I was actually looking for sex toys because right after my honeymoon with my miracle husband, I thought, gee, I better get something that's going to help because I've got no libido and no function here. And just looking online, I stumbled upon vaginismus, and I was absolutely floored because first of all, I just laughed out loud, and I was like, what dumb schmuck would name this condition? What a horrible name. And then I read the symptoms, and I realized I had had this for 30 years without any diagnosis. Well, since that time, in the last 9 years, basically, I see that vaginismus is talked about, though most people still don't know it, most people that I talk to. But I think younger women, at least when I'm talking, I work on college campuses. When I'm talking to younger women, they have more sex ed. When I hold up the what we call the internal clitoris, I get maybe 75% of the room says that they do recognize what this is. But when I start talking about advocating for their own pleasure, what I get is that the women, they've never thought to do it. It's like outside their realm of understanding of sex, that they have agency to say, hey, Joe, can you stop a minute? Just stop with the pounding, Joe. Can we stop a minute? I need to regroup here, maybe change position, maybe change activity. They are absolutely astounded and very afraid of trying this. They don't feel that they have agency whatsoever to have a voice in their sexual experiences. So we've gone far, I think, or we've gone farther with sex ed and even an idea of sex positivity. But when it gets down to let's say the rubber meets the road, so to speak, I think we haven't really made the progress that we need to make.
And speaking of daughters, Kirsten has a question. Kirsten, do you want to ask it, or do you?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you for being here, Laura. I'm really enjoying this topic. So Jeannie, thank you for bringing it to us. So my mom was one of those, she was not very well educated by her parents, but she had all the My Mother, Myself books and Free to Be You and Me. And so I learned early and openly, and then I raised my daughter similarly. And so I do check in with them. They're grown now. I check in with them. I have one daughter is queer. She's with a male partner and has been for several years. The other is married to a man. And so I'll check in with them. But now you're making me wonder if there's things that I could be checking in with them on, like the vaginismus. You know, I've never, I ask, you know, are there any issues? Remember that both of your satisfaction is both of your responsibility. When they were in high school, if they were dating somebody new, I would say, unless you can show me a condom in your pocket right now, there's no date. It's birth control is not her responsibility solely. And, you know, I just always made it. And I have one daughter whose reaction is always like, oh my God, this again. And the other is like, here's all the things. And so then I have to go, oh my God. I asked, but are there topics maybe, or approaches or don'ts? Maybe there's some do's and don'ts. We're talking with grown kids.
Yeah, such a great question. So I think that when I'm talking to young women and older women too, but young women, if I ask a question like, do you have pain with sex? Most of the time they'll say no. But if I ask, do you have orgasms when you have sex with your partner? Do you have as many orgasms as, or do you have an orgasm every time that you have sex? I can get a little more of a gauge, and maybe, so I think questions about pleasure, but they have to be specific, because if you say, are you enjoying yourself? I think we don't know as women, young women, older women too, we don't even know often whether we're having a good time, because we're so used to kind of going along with it. And it may feel okay. It may feel kind of good, or, you know, good, and then good, and then, you know what I mean? And so, so we may not really have a sense of something could be improved. So, but I think something like orgasm is very quantifiable, really. And then that becomes a way to have a conversation about equity, because to me, all of the work that I'm doing is a justice issue. I think that when women's bodies are used for the sake of somebody else's pleasure, which they can be for abuse, right? In an abusive situation, which is how I first, you know, I had these early experiences. That's a justice issue, a dehumanization. But I think that when women's bodies are used for male pleasure at the expense of our own comfort and also our own mutual pleasure, that's also, to me, a justice and equity issue. So I think asking about orgasms, whether they're having orgasms, whether they think they're having as good a time as their partner, if they feel that they are, that they have a voice, that if they feel that they have good communication with their partners, maybe if they ever feel how their libido is, if they ever feel that they don't want to have sex, and why they think that is, because often libido actually is low libido. What we call low libido is just tied to the fact that the sex that's coming at us at, let's say, 10 o'clock at night is just is really our partner's idea of what sex is, and we're just like,
Yeah.
really, really. But so we don't feel like we have a say in it. It's just like, it's either, right, it's going to be that or nothing. And so often we're going for nothing because we don't want that. It's just too much, right? We're tired, we're anxious, it's late. It's such a rigmarole. And then many times we just shut down because it's like, oh gosh, I've got to get myself in the mood for like this whole thing. When in fact, if we could get in there, that's where that outer course comes in, and kind of redefine the sexual experience, we might feel like, oh, I'm in the mood for something, but maybe not exactly what you have in mind. So let's see if we can kind of put this together and compromise. Kirsten, did I answer your question? Yes, and thank you for being such a great mom. That's just really So
And you saw that question about the I can't even say it. That's how much I don't know it. Vaginismus.
vaginismus, it's a horrible name. I
Vaginismus.
know.
And how to explain it to new partners, dealing with the shame and explaining it to new partners.
Oh gosh, such a good question. So first of all, with vaginismus, it really is imperative to get good a medical diagnosis and also good treatment. There's two great treatments for vaginismus. One is pelvic floor physical therapy, which is, it seems really horrendous, but I found personally I just got used to it. But somebody goes inside the vagina and they release the muscles. It's just like any kind of physical therapy, but it doesn't take place in the open area.
So you
wait,
you don't do it yourself? You have somebody do it for you? Oh my gosh, wow.
Yes. These are specially trained physical therapists, and they're really unsung heroes and sheroes of the sexual healing world, because those muscles, it's just like any other muscle that needs to be reconditioned, where you need physical therapy, you need exercises, but also you need release. And you can't release it with your mind. It's an involuntary muscular response. So you have to release it through some kind of manipulation and even like retraining the muscles. So one is physical therapy and the other is use of dilators. And dilators are basically, they're like dildos, and they come in different sizes and also textures. They could be hard plastic ones, silicone ones, and even glass ones. But anyway, a dilator kit usually has about 5 dilators, and the smallest is the size of a pinky, because when the vagina, let's say, narrows during atrophy with menopause, we've got to open it up, and dilators are also used for that, in addition to being used for vaginismus. So they may start small, and then they get larger and larger until they're the size of about 6 inches, about the size of an average erect penis. So before somebody could work with a partner, they really, I think, have to, or should, or might try getting really good remedies, getting a good diagnosis, a good provider to work with, and getting a remedy, a protocol with a professional that you can work with in the room, perhaps, but also, even if it's just dilators, having someone that you can go back to, talk to every week, to see how your progress is, and that person can give you specific things to do with the dilators. When you do work for vaginismus, you usually stop any kind of penetrative sex other than the use of dilators, because you don't want to have the muscles go back to a pattern of seizing up. So in working with a partner, it's not advised that you do your dilators and then you have intercourse, let's say. You have to pause intercourse and just work with the dilators to retrain the muscles. Now, partners could be in the room with you as you work with the dilators to get knowledgeable about your healing. That's a way to bring a partner into the whole process. Explaining to the partner, having your physical therapist, let's say, talk to your partner. I had my husband come to one of my physical therapy sessions, and the physical therapist trained him in doing special massage, internal massage, to keep those muscles working. And I was sobbing, because it was like, oh my God, this is so amazing that, that he would be part of this healing in such a profound way. So communication with a partner, and then the partner's got to be on board for the whole process, right? Because it's going to be, right, dilator use, and then different kinds of maybe penetration, but not for prolonged periods of time, to make that transition into penile sex, let's say, instead of just the dilators. So I think it's just I guess, communication's tricky. I guess the best thing is just to put it in a nutshell, find a good provider, and then bring your partner into the mix.
And we are going to ask, you're going to send us some resources. or buy the book, right? But because I have another line of questioning, but I know that there's some hints and suggestions for finding providers, because I guess it's very, I mean, it's not like any OBGYN knows this stuff. So we'll get to that. The other thing we brought up was masturbation, which I think we really need to talk about, because talk about shame. I mean, I have to, since we're all being honest here, I've been a masturbator since I was little. I mean, seriously, my family just thought, they were just like, oh my God. But I have to say that it being able to do that for myself prevented me from just sleeping around like a mad woman when I was in high school. So anyway, but I think, and I don't know where that kind of confidence came from. Like, I just like to do it, because there is so much shame that God, that is just, it's so heavy. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, I think the shame piece is really, really an impediment, and unfortunately it's so much a part of our lives, even just to think about those parts, right? They're dirty, or we think they're gross looking. I think that there's a lot of body shame around our genitals, and if you're heterosexual, you don't see other women's genitals except in porn, let's say, and they don't look like our genitals because they've been manipulated. And so sometimes through surgery or other kinds of, there are all bleaching, all kinds of different things that happen. So yeah, so shame, there's, religious shame, the messages like we talked about that we get from our parents. So remedy. I think the best remedy, the best remedy that I found is just talking openly about my sex questions. Doesn't even have to be problems, but just sex questions. Because now all of a sudden I'm stepping over a kind of line where it's taboo to talk about these things. And it's scary. The first time I talked, I found this self-diagnosis of vaginismus, and I asked a bunch of girlfriends, and I was sweating. I was so nervous. But I found that once I started doing that, it opened up not just my sex world, but my world, because I realized that this shame, anytime we're carrying shame, it really is dragging us. It's like sucking out the power from our power, the juice from our power, or the juice from our generator. It just pulls it out, because now we're in this like protective mode, and a mode where we feel like we're inferior. And it really, I think, gets in the way of female power. So I think just baby steps, even just to open up, just to talk to a girlfriend, say, hey, I wanted to ask you a question. This is going on with me. Have you ever heard of this? Or do you have a similar experience? Even that baby little step can, I think, start to free us up from that shame.
And I do think so. Here, I'm opening up. If people want to talk to me about masturbation, let's talk about it. No, but I have to just say that I told myself at one point, if I find a man who can give me a better orgasm than I can give myself, I'm going to marry him. And I did. So anyway.
I just unmuted myself for a quick second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things my mother told me, and obviously you can tell I'm kind of from a progressive family, my parents were the original potheads. I really come from strange. But my mother once told me to be careful with vibrators, because no man can ever compete with a vibrator.
Oh.
Okay, I'm gonna read.
That's okay. No, that's interesting. And Patrice, I love that you're giving suggestions. The Sullivan group, I guess, is in the Austin area.
Yeah, there's two that I know of.
Okay, well, that's good to know, and I'll put that again in when I send an email, a follow-up email to everyone. But I'm glad to know of a group that could help with that kind of thing.
Yes, and
they work on men too, men who have had prostate surgery. So it's not just female pelvic floor work; they do male pelvic floor work. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and Patrice rightly points out that it's not just vaginismus that they treat. Also in females or vagina vulva owners, there's also all kinds of different, right? There's post-pregnancy issues that can happen with the pelvic floor tightness, but also, a certain kind of laxity, that needs to be retoned. There can be bladder issues. There can be, the ability to stop urine flow. So incontinence, which can start to happen, especially as we get older. So I think that there's, if you just look up like that Sullivan group, even if you're not in the Austin area, if you look up the Sullivan group and look at the issues that they treat, that's a really good way to just see the benefits, the different benefits and possibilities with pelvic floor therapy. And when the pandemic ends, we can, hopefully see somebody in your area.
And can I say, what would you Google if you're like, what kind of specialist are these doctors that work on that? Is there?
It's just called pelvic floor physical therapy.
Okay.
Yeah, I only know about it because, and it's another important thing for women, that when the vaginal, and Lori, of course, you know far more than I do about this, but as you get older and the vaginal tissues thin out, which is what causes pain during intercourse, we also have to realize, and I was wrong, is I did a lot of weightlifting, and I lifted something that was too heavy. And when I lifted it too heavy, I gave myself what's called a rectocele. So I strained the muscle between my rectum and my vagina.
Oh.
So during bowel movement, and again, we're getting very open here, that muscle and that tissue can kind of fall into the vaginal canal. Now, for me, I'm fortunate, nothing has fallen out yet. I do a lot of Kegels to keep everything in. But we have to remember, everybody talks about core work. As we get older and you're going to lift up something heavy from the floor, squeeze those muscles. That's another way to get a pelvic floor prolapse.
Thank you, Patrice.
Okay, I'm going to quiet myself again.
So
it's fantastic, yeah.
And I guess also one thing that might come up, I think I've gotten to all the questions, but I just have, if your husband is not, as his libido is kind of heading down, and how to work on that together. Do you ever encounter that?
Yeah, sure. And so I think that I would recommend the same, that if there's any kind of libido issue, that you do get it thoroughly checked out for male and female or any gender, just to look at any underlying issues. So sometimes libido, not always, sometimes libido wanes for men because of low testosterone, and there are remedies if men want to boost their testosterone. And low testosterone also has a relationship in people of all genders with depression. And so, right, so you may want to just root out depression and treat these things. Also, sometimes low libido in men is linked to erectile issues and shame around that. So avoidance of sex, basically, because of that issue. And erectile issues have a very, very, very close relationship with other kinds of vascular problems. So if a man starts to have erectile issues, some doctors are going to just rush to give them Viagra. But what that man really needs is a full cardiovascular workup, because that may be an early sign that this person is at risk for a heart attack. Because it's all blood flow. It's all capillaries, it's all blood flow, it's all, right, it's all arteries, veins, plaque, all the things that would contribute to a heart attack might be actually at play, not allowing that blood to, what happens in the erection, it accumulates in this very specific way. The capillaries close off on both sides, and they force this swelling of blood. So there's not enough blood coming in to then get trapped in this, sexy way.
But I imagine too that for men, that the performance anxiety kind of thing, if you were going to say, okay, we're going to do what you call outer course or whatever, those different kind of things, that takes off, I would imagine, some pressure from.
It can, definitely. And then for other men, they're really just like, that's their concept of sex. And also that's the way that they men are allowed societally such a narrow spectrum of emotional possibilities. And so a lot of them were trained from a rather young age to seek love and validation and connection through the sexual act. They put it all in there. And so when they feel rejected sexually, often it's very profound, very, very, hurtful for them. And sometimes not being able to have sex the way that they understand it feels like rejection for them. So it really depends on the partner, but it is an ongoing conversation, but also an ongoing negotiation. That's why I recommend what I stumbled upon here which was this a way of framing sex as experiment or adventure, and bringing lots of different activities and different approaches to the table, and then like a smorgasbord. And maybe it's not so binary, like either we're going to have intercourse or we're going to do the other. Maybe it's just more like, right, like, okay, well, here's the many things that we might be able to do. Let's say Saturday at 4 or whatever, right after the, our salon. Here's a whole sampling of things. Like, let's talk about, what do you like? What do I like? What might we want to try together, and what the needs are. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great, and we're running out of time, but I wondered if anybody else, if you, I'm looking at you now on the graph. If you want to have any other question, just do your hand raise before we get off, or is
just reading about her right now and about the author.
Yeah, she's done it. She's done all kinds of things. A one-woman play. You're pretty.
I'd love to talk about menopause in our last couple of minutes, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
We haven't really talked about menopause, which is such a big issue for all of us. In 2014, they changed the designation of what we might have known as vaginal atrophy. Vaginal atrophy as terminology became something that was under the umbrella, that is now under the umbrella of something called GSM. And GSM stands for genitourinary syndrome of menopause. Yes, and we don't have a lot of information. I mean, we as clients, as patients, don't get this information from our doctors. And so we are left to put these dots together. So as an example with GSM, these are all the things that might happen with GSM. Some of them we know about, the thinning of the tissues, etc. But then there's other things that might happen for us. So let's see, propensity for bacterial and yeast infections, painful intercourse, narrowing and shortening of the vagina, loss of labia minora, the inner lips start to disappear, thinning of vaginal tissue, we touched upon that, burning inside the vestibule, soreness at the vaginal opening, inflammation of tissue surrounding the urethra, so that G-spot area that's supposed to feel good, we can have burning. Vaginismus can happen because the body's now shutting down, going into lockdown. Inflammation of vulvar tissue, vaginitis, bleeding during sex. So all these things might happen, and often we're not, but we're, like all of us, like, okay, we're having maybe a little burning, we don't know what to make of it, and then all of a sudden we're having a lot of bacterial infections, which we didn't used to have, right? So it's putting these dots together and understanding that low estrogen and low testosterone in some cases cause a variety of symptoms in many women. Petrus, did you have a question?
Yeah, again, this is a great subject. So a lot of things, like I know in perimenopause, or I have people who start telling me, I suddenly can't remember anything. So the mental aspects that go through, we all think about our vaginas during this thing, but being forgetful, becoming very emotional, almost like PMS, I remember when I started having perimenopause, I didn't know what was going on. And I remember I would hang up the phone, and 5 seconds later, I couldn't remember who I was talking to. I ended up going to a psychiatrist because I thought I was losing my mind. That's why I wrote the old movie, The Snake Pit, that was made in the 1950s. Women were locked away for going crazy. A lot of it was actually menopause that was going on. And as you said, not everybody experiences anything. I have friends who are in their 60s whose vaginas are just like they were when they were in the 20s, them and their lucky husbands. So it's a scary thing for a lot of women because we get this old crone. Oh, you're going to get all shriveled up and you're not going to be worth anything and your vagina is going to disappear or your brain's going to disappear.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and they don't really know exactly how many women are affected by GSM. There's an estimate that it's around 50%, but they don't really know because women don't talk about it. And also women may not, like a woman who might have a vagina that doesn't really have these like thinning or narrowing, lubrication might still, be okay. But that woman may have some, these bacterial infections that start, or maybe the inner labia start to get smaller. So they may not make that connection that there are these genital changes, perhaps, or they're not affected. But we just need a lot more research around this, and we definitely need more education to understand all these things that might happen to us, so that we can treat them, because there are great treatments that are available. But if we don't have the knowledge, then we don't know to ask our doctors, and then we can't get treated.
Well, I thank you so much. This is great. And I also wanted to say that, Patrice, we are having an event on Tuesday where we're talking about menopause and stress, that kind of like what's happening in your brain. So I hope people will come to that. I just put the link in the chat. I'm just putting it here. Do you know, Laura, do you know Darcy Steinke's book, Flash Count Diary, The Menopause and the Vindication of Natural Life? And do you know that book?
Oh, that sounds awesome. Can you put it in the link? That sounds amazing.
I have it here, but she's going to be one of the speakers, and she's like a serious author, novelist and everything. And she took, she had a terrible time during menopause, so she started investigating, like, why was it selected for? What we humans and whales are about the only creatures that go through menopause. So anyway, she'll talk about that. But I just wanted to put a plug in for that. Sorry. And I do.
Fantastic. I'll put my book in here as well. I'm going to put the Amazon link.
I'd like to order it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We want to order, but we also want to order Laura's book. There's Laura's book.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about, Laura's book. Yeah.
Oh yes. Okay. Good. So the answers to a lot of questions that we didn't get to, obviously, and I'm going to send everybody some of the information here, her link to her book, and I'm going to do a link to this video. I'm going to post it on YouTube, but a private video, just because I assume that people just would rather keep this. But if people tell me no, it's okay, I can do it public. But I think it's a private video would probably be better. So I'll give you the link to that in case there's other things, if you want to go over it, or if there's somebody you want to share this with who couldn't make it. So anyway, we thank you so much, Laura. It's so great to meet you in person.
Yeah. Likewise. And then when I get the link, I can put a couple of resources in there as well, like where to find a sex therapist, where to find a sexual medicine doctor, that kind of thing, if that's helpful.
That would be great. And everyone, thank you for coming as usual. I hope to see you again at another event. And Laura, again, we really appreciate it. Such helpful information. I know that we all need more talk of this kind of talk. It's very reassuring. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, really. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you. Thanks, Tribe. Thanks.